Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube art tutorial channel. I'm a professional artist working from my studio in Essex in the UK and painting plein air in the countryside. Good morning everyone, I'm in Battlesbridge this morning, near the old antique centre behind me. I'm heading off towards the outskirts of Southend. I've got a group going there, but I thought I'd stop off at this lovely little village really on the river, Battlesbridge here in Essex. I've painted here before, but we've got the old antiques and craft centre there, the lovely estuary. Very pleasant down here this morning, and of course we've got the lovely tide mill. Painted that a few times, but anyway, I must get on. I've got a course to deliver today on the outskirts of Southend. Well, I've arrived at this lovely old, it's fairly new hall behind me. I'm here to produce a day's workshop basically, so I'm gonna put all my stuff in the hall and let's meet everybody, I suppose. And this is the subject. Okay, well, as you can see, I've got the basic drawing onto my watercolour paper, and we're going to use Payne's Grey, right, for this. You could use any dark colour really, you know, we're getting tonal versions, so this is going to be a black and white version of the scene, okay? So all you really need is your large mop brush to start with, or a large brush. It doesn't have to point, but if it does have a point, then so much the better. It's not vital. And what I'd like you to, now you can paint along as I paint, or you can watch me do the sky, then you can do the sky, you know, it's entirely up to you. Some work will work faster than others, so, you know, we may be at different stages, but I hope to be able to marry you all together at some point along the process. Now, when you wet your brushes, make certain that you damp them thoroughly. You notice how I'm turning mine in the water, because there's lots of air in the brush, and if you just dip it in the water, you've only got water on the outside of the brush. You have to get rid of the air in the hairs of the brush. That way, for a start off, it's fully loaded with water. Okay? Now let's put that down there. Now I'm just going to use Payne's Grey. Now on the subject, you can see we've got some cloud work. Well, as John Constable, most coveted artist that I know of, a British artist, he used to design his skies to suit the landscape. So that's what I'm going to do. I've already, as you can see, we haven't really got a feeling of where the light is coming from. It's probably coming straight onto the building, but I'm going to have the light coming from the left, because it gives me so many options for shadow work. We've got shadows, the right hand side of the tree, a shadow laying over the building. We've got the gable end casting a shadow onto that building. We've got a shadow running away there, and we may even sneak in the odd shadow in the foreground. So anyway, I've damped the brush. First thing I'm going to do, this is tonal version, but it's exactly the way we will use colour, okay? That's why I said watercolour paper, brushes, paint. So the first thing we will do with this sky, we will damp the paper down as far as the buildings. So all you do, you thoroughly damp. Now I'm working at this angle, which is not ideal, but you know, over the years I've gradually developed well, it's still not an exact science, put it that way. But over the tree, on the large tree, and the tree on the right, but don't go down any further than the roof areas of the buildings, because that is where we want to remain white paper at this stage. And down as far and over the actual, there's a fence there, nice little fence that you need to paint down as far as. So that's really all you need to do. It needs to be damped thoroughly. Maybe you'll have to damp it a couple of times. Depends on your paper. Barkingford is fairly absorbent, so you know. And the idea of damping the paper, this process we're going to call, and it is called, wet into wet. So we've got wet paper and we will have wet paint. So it's wet into wet, and that way we get lovely soft edges. Right, now I'm going to create some clouds. Now the tone of those clouds, the clouds are white, the blue sky is dark, well, medium tone, right? So I'm using paint grey, fairly strong, medium tone, and I've got light coming from here, and I'm going to create the tops of those clouds. So that is, in effect, the blue of the sky, okay? I'm going to feed that away, so that's the blue there. You'll notice that it will run down, which is, you know, it's not a bad thing, really. You know, you end up with quite a nice little feeling of clouds, and they're soft edge clouds because we're working wet into wet. Now I'm going to go a little weaker for the undersides of those clouds, there, like that, and also a little bit of cloud work this side. I'm not going to put too many clouds in. Okay, and I'm going to paint around that building there, because those clouds are going, the blues going right down into the distance, and a little bit over here. There we are, and all of a sudden we've got ourselves a nice atmospheric sky. Either you could almost turn it into a thundery sky, really, if you wished. And really, the quicker you lay the watercolour onto paper, the better. The quicker, the better. If you play around too long, you don't get that freshness. A lot of people say to me, you know, artists that can handle watercolour, their colours are nice and fresh. Well, that's because of the way they've spread the paint on, allowed it to dry, and not played with it. Don't keep rubbing at the paper. Drop the colour in, and the shapes will form because you're working wet into wet. Okay? The fresher, the quicker, the better. Don't play with it, because every sky will be different, right? And you've got to remember it's only a backdrop for the landscape. So a lot of people go wrong by over-painting skies. It's not a study of clouds, okay? It's an actual backdrop to create the mood of the day, which is a sunny day. That's what we're trying to depict. Good, and I'm just allowing that because the actual shapes that form, it can only be done by leaving it alone. Because, you know, unlike oils or acrylics where you have to model things and blend things, that happens in the drying process. I've got a lot of rundown, right, which I expected at this angle. You, at that angle, would probably get reasonable shapes that hold fairly firm. So, you know, whether you want, if you tilt the paper, if you want a lot of rundown, if you want them to more or less just form the shape that you put on in the first place, then that's fine. You know, it doesn't, I'm not concerned about the actual, you know, I wouldn't want, well, there's no way that you'd ever get the same as me, and there's no way I would ever get the same as you. Each one will be totally individual, okay? Now, if it is very dark, don't worry too much. The main thing is you allow it to dry in its own way, right? You'll have little runbacks, you'll have little areas, but leave it, because the more you... Now, if I were to start thinking, well, that's joining up there, I'm just going to lift that away, and I'll go in and I model that. It wouldn't look right, because all of a sudden, that area is modelled, and the rest is smooth and fresh. Then you think, well, I better do a bit here. And before you know it, you've completely overplayed the whole thing. So this is the thing with watercolour. They always say, or one artist said to me, paint 3 pictures a day instead of working on one all week, right? Because you learn so much more. Because most of the time spent trying to model areas is not what we're looking for in watercolour. We're looking for clean, fresh layers of colour that give that transparent look, because that's what we're doing. We're not using any white, we're using the white of the paper. Good. Now while that's drying, I'm going to lay the field in. Now the field is quite light, right? So plenty of water with your Payne's grey. And this time I'm going wet onto dry paper. So I'm not damping the paper, because what I want is the layers of colour to stay in the area. Right? I don't want it flooding around. Right? So that's the difference, you know, wet into wet, the colour spreads. Wet onto dry, the colour holds a bit more where you lay the colour on. So it just depends what you're looking for. So I'm going very light to start with. And I'm going to put a sweep of light colour on the field, like that. And this is why I say use a large brush. As I come forward, I'm adding a little bit more colour, a little bit more strength of colour. So there is just a little bit more tone there, because that's the thing that will give us that lovely sort of atmospheric feel to the landscape. Now notice the landscape I'm running across the paper, because the land lays flat. If it were to go down at an angle, I'd paint down at an angle. You know, it's one of those things where, you know, it is pretty obvious when you're told, but it's not always obvious until you're actually told, basically. Now, as I come into the foreground, notice how I'm pulling across the paper, leaving, hopefully, some little touches of white to give a gravelly effect. Okay? And can you see the way I've got depth immediately within the tone? It's stronger in the foreground, lighter in the distance. If you can get that, then it's all delicate mixing of the strength of colour. That's the thing we're looking at, the tone of the colour, not the actual colour itself at the moment. This will be green, a very light green coming through to a darker green. But at the moment, we're looking at the tones. We've got a sky in. Now we've got the land that the buildings sit on. Okay, one last thing. Did you notice the crop markings in the foreground field? Right? They give depth. Right? Now, a lot of people, when they're learning, they pull their crop markings down like that. And it looks as if the field falls away in front of you. Right? Perhaps you are looking up a hill, then that's justified. But the more you pull, the more of an angle, you have one that's virtually upright, and then you pull these out, that gives you depth. And it looks as if it's flat, rather than dropping away in the foreground, right? Now, not too much on the brush for this. With the point of a brush, so if your brush you've been using doesn't point, then use a smaller brush that does point, okay? And what I do, I will have to use this little stick, I think, just to make certain, you know. And we're looking for crop markings, right? They're not really in the field, although you can see some form of marking. But what I do, they're bold markings in the foreground, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, right? But don't go right up to the building. In a painting, you want people to imagine things. Don't put down everything, right? Because if you describe everything, that's your photograph. You're creating your impression of the subject. So, dodge it around like that. If it's still damp, so much the better, really. And as I say, make certain that the marks go smaller, because the foreground, the marks would be quite wide. But then as you go away into the distance, they appear smaller. Same there, and dot that away, and just one or two little areas there, a little bit of area there, one or two little dots, and running away there. Now what they are, what sort of crop, or whether it's just I'm not really sure, but we're not really worried. All we're doing is creating an illusion of depth on a flat surface of paper. And if you can do that, there again, can you see the way it pulls that foreground field towards you? The eye wants to go into the subject. And if you notice, I think I did that on the drawing. Yes, I did. That they all head to the barn door that's open, because I want people to think, I wonder what's in that barn, you know? Now, we're not going to depict the front of a tractor or anything silly like that, but there is an opening for people to think, because there's no depth other than that, but the depth is inside the building. Okay. Right, now which tree? Well, let's do this one first, right? I'm going to use a large brush for this. Not a bad idea if you use a brush that points. I mean, I could do it almost with any brush, but for aid to it, it doesn't have to point, because you can, there are ways you can just dot around. But anyway, let me just do this. Now, to start with, we've got light coming from the left, right? So we've got shadow on the right-hand side, right? So pick up your light tone to start with, and start in the centre of the tree, because it's dense, right? And pull the brush across, and then use the point of the brush to suggest the top of the tree and overhanging branches. Try and work fairly, and at the top of the tree, it tends to get a bit more open. You know, all the years I've been painting trees, I tend to use a similar sort of approach, and plenty of gaps, but not too many. A little bit of gapping in the middle. This is sort of like this is the light tone of the tree, really. This is not the dark tone. Right, move fairly quickly if you can, and once you get down to the halfway stage there, notice how I've got branches that are coming out, not individual leaves, branches. Now I'm going to go a tone darker now, right? And I'm going to go back in on the undersides of some of those branches. This is the medium tone and the lower part of the tree. Normally trees in the lower part tend to be darker. So that's what I'm doing. Right, and don't go beyond the extremes. You can always make it larger, but you can't take it away. And this is what I say with a lot of these large trees. You can always add to it, but you can't take it away. Now I'm going in with really dark colour for the shadow side. And it looks extremely dark, but as I said to you before, it does dry considerably lighter. And most of that will be on the right-hand side, that's in shadow. And, you know, I mean, I'm making quite a job of this one, but it doesn't have to be quite as... Now, I've gone over one thing there that I thought was exceptionally good, but now it's not as good as the tutored. But we've all been there, so let's just keep going. Don't worry about it. No, keep going, Colin. Don't worry about it. There we go. And I think that's don't play with it. As I say, going back in with another brush stroke. Now, just allow that to dry. We can put in really dark tones once it dries. So we're beginning to get a feel of shape to that one. Yes, we can live with that, I think. Now, the tree behind it, I want to be separate because that's behind the building rather than this one in front of the building. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put the trunk in while the tree is still damp. And the trunk work, make the trunk sit under, it's got to be quite dark this time. Let's be really dark. There we are, pick up some real strong colour. And it needs to be fairly meaty, but don't make it too wide because, as I've said before, you can always make it wider, but you can't make it smaller. And I'll give mine just a little bit of an angle, just to give it a bit of depth. And one last thing, take a small brush, because I want that tree to sit just on the ground in front of that building. And how do you get that tree to look as if it actually sits into the landscape? Well, all you do, while the trunk is still wet, you just draw a damp brush across like that. And all of a sudden, it sits into the landscape instead of actually on top of it, if you like. So there you go. One sweep of the brush and, hey presto, it's sitting into the landscape. The right hand side, now it's dry. So if yours isn't dry, then give it a little bit of time. But I'm going to go in on the right hand side there, like that. On the underside here, one or two little touches. Not too many, because we don't want... and there again, it looks extremely dark, but just one or two little touches, not too many. And I'm going to the extreme now. So I'm running right the way out onto, it's nice being on the underside of that tree too. One or two little touches like that. There we go. We don't want to get fussy. I'm getting a little bit fussy with this now, so I'm going to have to stop. But basically, you've got the basic shape with shadows, lights, mediums and darks, and that's all you need really. You know, that is that tree put in its sunlit state. As I say, some of you may be more dark all over, which doesn't matter. I wouldn't suggest start lifting off, because this is where you lose that freshness again. Go with the tone you've got and try and adjust everything else to suit that. Right, next thing, let's do the right hand side now. Now we've got two trees on the right hand side. One will need to be darker than the other. That way it will separate them, okay? If you make them the same tone, they'll probably be one tree. So, we need to separate the tone. Now, I'm going to have the darker one running out of picture and the lighter one slightly further away. And all you need to do for that, reasonable tone with this. Now, although this is the sunlit side, bit of license required to make certain that it is dark, holding in that right-hand side. I'm not going to be as dark as that there, but it does need to be dark. And this one, I'm going to try and treat just a little bit, you know, I know it's fairly close, so it will be, yeah, let's just treat it like that. Let's not get too complicated. So that's the dark tree running out of picture on a medium to dark tone. And that more or less runs there. Let's just go a little bit darker with that. Just got a little bit light. There we go. That'll be fine. Okay, so that's that tree running out of picture to the right. Nice balance this scene with these trees. I do like that. That seems to be working. Now, while that's drying, I'm going to produce the tree on the left that's behind that building. Now, hopefully, this area should be dry, all right? And this tree is going to be considerably lighter, and it's going to be treated in a bit more of a simpler fashion. So it's just a clump, really, as far down as the top of the roof of the barn. But paint around the light side of the tree, okay? So that's the tree in the distance. Could take it up a touch more, perhaps. There we are. Not too, if you notice, I'm not too concerned with that because the large tree dominates. We don't want to get too bogged down with these distant trees, you know. This same tone, perhaps even a little lighter, will be used for the lighter tone of this tree. So we're getting lights, darks, lights and darks. And that goes right the way down there like that. And that one is not quite as detailed, if you like. And it finishes somewhere on the edge there. That's fine. Good. We're getting there with the lights, mediums and darks within our landscape.
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Did you put in that cloud just a minute ago? I think you missed
This one here, yeah, it's meant to be, well, it's more or less distant trees, really, you know. Yeah, if you look on the scene, it's actually a distant tree, which, to be fair, if you start putting in detail like that, it's crazy. I'm losing that, and I'm losing that one, because these are the main trees, you know. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, a cloud would be nice, you know. Yeah, well, you know, it's it really is a matter of not giving it detail. That's the key to it. Good. Right you are. Now, we're going to paint the buildings. Now, the tone of those buildings, well, I'm going to keep them more or less what I see. But we may have to juggle a bit with the tone values. Just one thing, there is just a little bit of land that runs away in the distance there. So I'm going to put that in very, very weak. In actual fact, it's more or less only tinting the paper. There's a bit of land. I'll just, in reality, there is a building there, but I've left that because it didn't look right. Because the building is the other side of the hill, you can only see the roof. And if you put that in, then, you know, I didn't want to make it too complicated. Far better to work fairly simply, really. Right, my main concern now is the tone of this barn. Okay, we've got the very dark tree, so we don't want a dark barn against the dark tree, because even if you've got colour, it could merge together. It wouldn't separate. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to put in a medium tone. See, this is good mixing, really, because although you're mixing, when we do colour, you're mixing colour, you've got to get the tone of that colour right to be successful, right? And you're already doing it in density of paint using the Payne's grey. All you've got to do is get that same density with the colour to produce that tone that you're looking for when we produce colour. Right, now I'm going to start here. Yeah, there you go. And I'm painting in the roof. This roof is going to be a little darker in the sky, but lighter than the actual tree itself. So that's the crucial thing, getting that tone right. And this is a lovely old, what I suppose you'd call it, a lovely old Essex barn, really. Big roofs, lovely wide barn. There we are. Okay, so yeah, that works. That works for me. And while we're doing this, a little bit lighter. Yeah, that sort of, yeah, that's good. For the barn roof there, that runs out of picture. So we don't want to lose the tone of the tree. Notice, although I've put colour on, or tone, I've not lost the tone of the tree. And then I'm going to go darker now with the roof of the small building. This is a wooden building, and this needs to be put in a dark tone, darker than the roof of the other building, but not as dark as the tree. At the moment, that tree and the shadow side is darker than any of them. And while I have this medium to dark tone, I'm going to go down on the underside of the gable end there and there, because without that you can't see the other side of the gable end. It's more or less the shadow from the overhang, but the shadows will come in very shortly. Good. Yeah, that's coming along. Yeah, that's our tonal version. Always a good idea to produce a tonal version of your landscape before you start. Even if it's just a quick sketch with one brush on a small piece of paper, you get a feeling of darks and lights. And any mistakes we make with the tone on this one, we can correct on the coloured version. Good. And right. What? Yeah.
If you find you've got too much water gathering into one corner, do you just leave it?
I got a little bit of a run because it will run back into the drier mix. So all I do, you can get another, just a lightly wetted brush will draw off. Yeah. As I would say, a damp brush will lay on water or colour. But a wet brush will lay on water or colour, but if it's only lightly damp, it will draw off the colour. So yeah, if you've got a blob in that corner, I mean I have, and it's running back into a sort of a cauliflower effect, but I'm not going to get fussed over that. But had I lifted it off earlier, it wouldn't have done that. But I'm not really worried.
It does work.
It does, yeah, it lifts up, yeah. Yeah, a brush will draw off colour as well as laying on colour. Depends on how wet or dry it is. Good, so that's that. Now, the main buildings themselves, this building I'm going to go a little lighter if I can. And I say if I can, because I'm not sure. Let's go in the gable end first. There we go, that's fine. So that's the gable end. That will be in shadow eventually, but at this stage I'm leaving it. Can you see here? Well, I'll tell you what, let's do that gable end as well, because if we do that, you can see a feeling of light. All of a sudden, because we've got white paper on the sunlit side, you can see a feeling of light coming onto that landscape. There you go. That is your medium tone, and I'll tell you what, I'm going to go really light for the front of the building. At the moment this is quite dark, so I'm just going to do this one first, just see where we go with that. There we go. But I've actually painted over the windows, but I've painted around the opening there. Not really that light, but there we go. And this is going to be light as well. Not painting the door, but you can do. There's not much of a problem if you do. Go. And then this barn here. There's another old barn that's just standing there. It'll all take shape when we come to paint the real strong shadow work. And on the gable end of that is a little darker. There we are. So we've been very light with the buildings. You can see sunlight on them buildings now. You know, they've all of a sudden got a clean, fresh film of light. One last thing before we allow that to dry, I'm going to paint in the dark fencing. And we don't want this fencing to be too uniform. There we go. And that completes the general start, or, you know, we're getting there. Okay, now we're going to do the openings of the doors, right? Well, let's do this one first. Now, inside at the top is very dark because you're inside the barn, very little light, plenty of water, plenty of paint, very little water. It is difficult to get the tone right. But of course, with watercolour you can go over again, but if you're not dark enough, go over when it's dry. And then you'll get another layer of paint and that will make it darker. If you go over while it's wet, it just blends and disappears again. Right, now, this is inside the opening. Plenty of paint, very little water. Right, now, across the top, down the left-hand side is where all of the shadow will be. This is a nice little tip, this, when you're painting door openings. Very dark, but of course it will dry up considerably lighter. Right, that is where the sun is not entering the building. Right? Now, if you wanted to depict hay bales, or something going on in there, you could do that now in a medium tone, and all of a sudden you've got a sense that something's inside. But I'm just going to give solid depth, and the way you do with that, you remove most of the paint from the brush, and then you drag down that colour while it's still damp. So that way it appears that the light is heading into the lower part of the building. And that is the difference between a glazed area that would be treated differently to that and an opening that you can see inside. So that's, that's pretty much as it is really. Just bringing a little bit on the base there. I like to see a little bit of colour along the base. Or strength, but basically that gives you the inside of that building. Now we're going to do the same with this one, and if you notice there's just a double line there because that's the thickness of the wall itself of the barn. Right, now this one I'm actually going to produce something inside. So what it is, I don't know, but who knows? Something's going on inside that barn, and it's up to the viewer to work out. I mean, sometimes I'm painting other things like creepers up the front of a building. And people say to me, "Oh, I say, you're good at clematis," and I say, "Oh yeah, I can paint clematis." And then another person will say, Is that a rambling rose? Yes, I'm good at rambling roses. Whatever you see is what it is, basically, you know. Don't get too bogged down in creating specific things. You know, it's different if you're close up with a subject and you're actually looking, you know, at almost the heads of the flowers, you know. But if you're at a middle distance, you know, it could be anything really. So that's what I'm doing here, and I'm just putting in a little bit of tone inside that building on the dry area. And all of a sudden we've got sort of like an opening that enters, and now I'm just going to put the windows in just before we stop. And these will be medium to dark tones. And there's a window here, there, like that, window there. Put them in very simply. And we'll put in shadow at a later point. Oh, and there's a door there behind that tree. Might as well fill that in as well. I'm not going to be too dark with that because that interferes with the trunk if you do. And that is the first main stage. All we've got to do after our break is to paint in our shadows and bring it all to life. Okay, we'll have a short break then. Okay, so now we look at the shadow work. Now, shadows are, to me, probably, well, I'm saying the most important. They probably are actually, you know, in this type of subject, because they will create light on areas that at the moment look a bit, you know, you can't see the light at the moment. So, first thing we're going to do, let's put that down and I'll pick that up, there we go. I'm going to put in, I need a mix that is quite dark to start with, right? So, I'm putting paint into one part of the palette. I'm now adding the Payne's Grey, and I'm removing some of the moisture in the brush, because that will give me the opportunity to get the colour or the tone right. And I think that should be about it. So the brush is pretty well loaded. Right, let's start off with the buildings. Because to me, that area there is most important for the sunlight. We can just shadow other areas and just lose them. It's all heading towards that area. Right, now I'm going to paint in the gable end of that building. Right, with this fairly dark tone, because that is in strong shadow. And use a large brush if you can, because it will give you the opportunity to put a clean wash of colour. Don't forget the overhanging roof areas. There's a little overhanging roof area there. Can you see where we've got overhanging roof areas? Try and pick those up, because they are very important. Come right the way down with that, but don't finish dead flat. Leave some little spiky edges, because there will be grasses standing up. You know, this is an old farmyard, you know. We've not been round with the sit-on mower, you know. This is purely an old farmyard. Right, now I'm going to paint in the shadow side of this one. Similar tone, could be a little lighter, but... And you may even find that the first area that you painted in actually tends to show now on the overhang of those roof, the gable end, the tiles. But either way, see that little area there where it overhangs? You always have an overhang of the roof line in most buildings, because that's where gutter would be if it was actually put in or assembled. There we are. And immediately, can you see the way those buildings stand out against the sunlit frontage, really? Okay, that's looking good. Right, next, I think we've got that, 2 gable ends, and just put the colour on, allow it to dry, just leave it. Now, the next one, right, the overhang. Now, the roof line there, the gutter, you've got an overhang. So under that, you've got a shadow, right? So, not too dark, no, don't want to be as dark as the tree, and a nice sweep of shadow. Don't go over the door at this stage, go around the doors, but a nice sweep of shadow. Go around that door, there's perspective there, and the other side of the door, because that's crucial. And make it fairly deep. Make it fairly deep. You don't want to be too shallow with that. There we are, yeah. And that shows the overhang of that. And you do the same with this one. There, like that. Don't have to be dead straight, because these old buildings rarely are dead straight. See the way we're beginning to get a bit of light on there now. We've actually lit up those buildings purely with that bit of shadow. Right, where else do we go? Well, let's deal with the overhang of this one here, because at the moment we can't see that, but there's the overhang shadow there, and I'm going to paint in that gable end again. It will get a little dark against that tree, but I think we can live with that, because I'm going to, in actual fact, I don't think we can live with that. And so let's just lift that off a touch, so as we're not overdoing that. There we go. Yeah, don't want to be too dark. That's where we can still see the trunk. That's good. We've got a bit of shadow to come on that later on. That's all looking good. Okay. A little bit lighter there. Right, now, there are casting shadows from that, those roof lines, and one, because the sun is not, it's just further round, so the casting shadow from that gable end would run up there like that and down across there like that onto this area. And notice how I've painted them separately, because that gives a nice separation between one shadow and another. Okay? Then, of course, because that is in shadow, then the wall of the barn would also be in shadow. There we are. And all of a sudden, you've got that building in shadow. And try not, I've left a bead of light there. I don't want any light on the top. There we go. That's all right, that's fine. So that brings those buildings into sunlight. Okay? So we've got the 2 gable ends, the overhang of the roof lines on all of the buildings, and then the casting shadow from that large gable end onto the smaller barn on the right. Good. That's fine. Okay. Right. Now, where else do we need shadows? Well, if you think about it, that door would cast a shadow running at an angle behind it because it's open. And there again, try and make it uneven where it meets the ground. That just helps to give that impression of, just go just a little darker, just put that through there. That's it. Don't make it too large, you can always, that's better. There we are. See the way we got that lovely film of light from that door. And all of a sudden the whole thing begins to come into light, begins to come into sunlight. Good. So that is the main shadows. All buildings will have a form of shadow. Now, and sometimes there'll be different tones within that shadow. In other words, as the sun comes, if the sun is dead on the front of the building, that would be in sunlight with the overhanging shadow from the gutter. Then as the sun moves round, the gable end begins to lose its strength, so it gets slightly darker. So sometimes if the sun is just going past the centre line, the gable end is of a medium tone, but then the overhang of the gable end roof shows the real shadow. And then finally, once the sun moves right round, like we are here, it turns completely dark. So on a building, you can get lights, mediums and dark tones. It's spotting that in amongst the colour, right? Because most people, when they're learning, they're more concentrated on the colour because they're thinking, oh, everyone gets that colour. The colour you mix is not as important as the tone of that colour. If you get the tone right, then the red you use on the tile roof or brickwork, or the grey you use, or the browns you use on the woodwork, they're not as important as the tone value. As you can see here, we've still got that feeling of sunlight, even though we've got no colour. So if you can get that, you'll get your pictures to become sunlit and basically improve immensely, really. Okay, now what I want to do, I'm now going to use a lighter tone, not too light, but a lighter tone, because you'll find that that tree is actually casting a shadow onto the building. Now this is where the feeling of atmosphere comes in, right? Now, if you've been light with your building, then this will show up considerably better. Right? If it's already dark, don't go too dark, because I don't want it darker than the darks, but I want it darker than the lights. Right? Because if it's as dark as that, you wouldn't see where the tree finishes. That's why I had to just lift off there again, because the trunk and the distant barn got lost. Right? So, you know, it does happen and you need to adjust to that. Right. Now, let's just check and hope. We check and hope. Oh, yeah, that probably is about right. Okay, we've got that lovely tree that's casting a shadow with, about like that, I suppose that would probably work. There we go. Cover up all the lights within that. Have the odd branch coming out. There we go. Look at that. And immediately, you've got a feeling that that is casting a shadow onto the sunlit roof of the building. Yeah? Seems to be looking good. Right, then that would also cast a shadow on the ground, possibly the trunk running up the wall a touch, but then we would go in there again with some leafing that's on the wall of the building. Yeah? So all of a sudden we've got that feeling that there's sunlight on that tree and there are shadow areas. This This is good fun, isn't it? This is good fun. Right, and we're going to have a shadow from that barn running slightly to the right, like that. There we are. So you see the barn set on the ground. Now I've justified that with that shadow running on the grass to the right. You wouldn't see it, we've already done that one, that runs onto that building. But this one goes on the ground. So it doesn't go high up because there's nothing. If there would be a tree there or a bush, it could run up that, or a building, it could run up that. But as it is, it just lays flat on the ground, really. So that's pretty much that. Just pull that a little bit darker there, running into the building. Right, now this is where the fun starts. This is where more fun. It may not be fun at the end, depending on the results, but at the moment that sounds like fun. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to paint in what I'd class as moody shadows. Moody shadows. You see, the good thing is we've got clouds in the sky. So to create mood, we can put shadow on the landscape. If you study landscape, you probably notice that as the clouds cover the sun, you get a lovely shadow running along the landscape, right? So all of a sudden the building comes into sunlight and the foreground is dark. Then all of a sudden the building is dark and the foreground is light as that shadow sweeps across the landscape. Now these shadows are normally soft-edged. If you get a shadow from a tree, because they're very close to where the shadow's being cast, they're hard-edged. But if you get a distant tree or a distant building or cloud shadows, then they are soft-edged because the light goes around. You don't see hard edges. That's very soft-edged. Right, and what you need for that, you need another slightly damped brush, just in case. Well, you will need it. Right. Now, where are we going to have this moody shadow? Well, I'll tell you what, we're too light here, right? So I'm going to bring a shadow over that building like that and down into the landscape, right? At the moment, I mean, it could be a building out of picture. But what I'm going to do, I'm just going to soften that just with a damp brush. Do it fairly quickly, so that we're more or less got a soft edge to that. Right? Now, here we go. I'm going to sweep a shadow into that, which is going to run tapered like that, and then another one that runs across like that. Right? Then all you do is just pull it across with a damp brush. Damp brush, not a wet brush. You remember, we don't want that to get all hard-edged or, you know. See that immediately you've got that film of light hitting that area, right? And I'm going to bring that right the way down into that corner, tapering off like that. Don't mind the harder edges in the foreground, I don't mind that. Some of you at the back there, I notice you've already got your lovely dark shadows in the foreground. So you've possibly done it as in the first instance, which sometimes is better, really. And I'm getting a run back there, right? Well, that is tall grasses. Aha, you see? What sort of grasses? Well, it's, you know, if you know your grasses, that's what they are, whatever you think they are. Right. But we need to balance then with just something the other side, right? So I'm just going to stop that sunlight running out of picture too much. So I'm coming in that side. Don't be too dark with this. This is giving the whole painting a moody feel. There we go. Yeah, I think that's okay. And then in the foreground on the right, we have another real strong shadow and one or two little undulating sort of shadows within that area there like that. There we go, look at that. And that is what I do to create the feeling of mood within the landscape. Right? And when you stroke your colour on, stroke it on, don't rub at the paper, because if you do, you can lift off the colour underneath, which mixes them all together and you end up with muddy colours, or you lose that freshness. So clean, fresh colours, and then a damp brush, just blend them through and allow them to do their own thing. Vital. Look at that. This watercolour painting, isn't it good? Isn't that lovely? Huh? It really is. Who needs acrylic or oils when you've got watercolour? Oh, somebody down the front, yes. But I'll tell you, I do know artists that sketch in oils and paint their watercolours. Now, normally it's the other way round. You know, lots of oil artists sketch in watercolour and finish off in oils. Having said that, I do use acrylic paint quite often, which is one step up from oils. I have painted in oils, but I prefer acrylic. It dries quicker. It's very similar to watercolour, but you can also overpaint. The only thing I find is that I still play around too much. Because in watercolour, I only get 1 or 2 hits at it, whereas with acrylic, I think, oh, well, I can adjust that later, But you shouldn't think like that. You've got to get it right fairly early on. And a lot of people say to me, well, I can overpaint that and improve on that. But if you know how to improve on it, then you won't need to because you would have done it, right? So it's all about learning to use the medium that you've chosen. That's about what it amounts to. What I'm going to do, I'm now going to put in the finishing touches. So that's my final thing to do. And now these will be fairly dark overall. And, you know, basically that's all there really. You know, we've not got too much more to do. But there are little areas. There's always an area underneath. I mean, it may be that, you know, if that were to be, I did these farm buildings, I'm not sure they have guttering, but we're going to put what I would class as the real dark edge underneath there, like that. See the way that gives another tone to that. I'm going to put that dark edge under there. I'm going to go down the gable end too, with the really dark tone from the underside of the overhanging roof area. There we are. We're just finely tuning that finished painting. And this is what I would do, you know, with the coloured version, exactly the same. And notice how I've lost that area there, and I've to some extent lost the distance. It's all about that central area, and that is the key, that you create a focal point which is probably around that area there, and you lead the eye into that. Right? You need things around it, but the eye mustn't be drawn to there, because once you're drawn to an area on the edge, then your eye wanders out of picture instead of looking at the focal point, pulling your eye into the picture itself. And that's what these markings do in the foreground. They draw your eye into the picture. Okay, now we have some little bits of detail. One area that I think is worth looking at, with a very dark colour, you've got the thickness of that door opening there. Now, should I be dark? Hang on a minute. Perhaps I shouldn't be as dark as that. There you go. That door, that is the thickness of, it's either going to be darker or lighter. So it's going to have to be darker now. Hang on. Let's go dark. There we go. That is the thickness of the building wall. the wall of the building. Can you see that? And that denotes the depth. You won't see it here because that's a door, right? But you will see it because there's no doors on there. Good. That's nice. Okay, now windows. Well, I think they're more openings. I don't think they're windows. I don't think they're glazed. I don't think being farm buildings they would be glazed. But they're just openings really. So what we do to the window, we put a shadow across the top, down the left-hand side. Across the top, down the left. And if the sun was coming from the other side, it would be across the top and down the right-hand side. Right? Right, there's another little window here, across the top, down the left. Oh, I've got two there, across the top and down the left. Good thing with old farm buildings, they don't have to be perfect, because farm buildings rarely are. They're quite aged and good. That's fine. Also, with a quite dark colour. Now this is personal to this painting. Maybe your tree is dark enough, but for me, I need just some little touches on these outside edges to enhance the feeling of light. There we go. Because it's very light, so I'm just putting in one or two little touches just on it's more or less the underside of any branches that hang out into the sunlight, really. Some of you may need it. I would say a lot of you probably don't, but I think that just gives that a little bit more hint that the sun is coming from the left. And also, there's little things going on in the lower area there, against the barn. You know, one or two little dots, the grasses are standing up here and there. Perhaps a little touch there as well. Oh, there is a door here. Let's just remove that. There's a door opening there, but it's actually not open, it's closed, but I'm putting a shadow on that because we can then see the door. Some of you may not need to. It just depends what, you know. And we've got to decide how much detail we want to put into this. Don't need a lot really, because we're looking at farm buildings in sunlight, so we don't need a great deal of detail. Okay, the door itself, it's we've got some sections in this door. Now I'm just drawing them down very simply, these simple treatment, and underneath that is a closed door, by the way. So it's just lining up that closed door. The open door I'm not going to do anything with. And do you have anything on the drawing of that? No. This is a barn with what you'd call, it could be shiplap, tongue and groove wood. And I'm only showing this on the sunlit side, or sunlit edges. Not going into the shadow with that. So I'm using the point of the rigger to create the illusion of the odd. Don't make them too uniform, because it's rough, it's uneven. If you make them too uniform, you lose the aged feel of those sections. Just sweep the brush across. Don't put them all. Don't put everyone in. Just put one or two in one area, leave a gap. One or two in another area, leave a gap. Far better than each individual one being shown. There we go, just put the corner on that so we can see that. I'm not even going to put in tiles. I'm not going to worry about any of that sort of detail. I don't think it's necessary really. I'm just going to put in a little bit on the overhang there, and there's one or two little lines there where we've got some uprights to the old, whether it's an old corrugated building, I'm not sure. But notice there again, I haven't gone into the shadow type. I don't want to create too much interest here. I want all the interest to be there. And I think basically that does it, really. Oh, one last thing. There's always one last thing. And the problem is with one last thing, that if you go too far, that last thing is you've overdone it. But basically, I do feel that this foreground would benefit from just a little bit of enhancement of those crop markings, particularly in the shadow area. There, just one or two little touches, not too much there, running out of picture. And these will die back, obviously, being watercolour, they'll dry considerably lighter. But it's always nice to put in the odd darker touch in the foreground. Always an interesting thing to do, because it pulls your eye, you know, it sets the scene in the foreground for what you're imagining in the distance. There you go, one or two little touches there. Not too many as you go away into the distance. And what about the birds in the sky? Hey, how are we with birds? Are we talking about golden eagles? Or are we talking about sparrows just in the distance?
I'll tell you when I find it.
Correct. That is the answer. Whatever the viewer says they are, that's what they are. Don't worry. Right, and all I do for my birds in the sky, and also where do you put them? That's another interesting thing, you know. You've got to be a bit careful, but I feel with the balance, somewhere about here would be nice. Now don't overload the brush, you don't want blobs. You need nice little delicate areas, and I'm not going to put it in the white, or should I put it in the white? Do you know I'm going to put it in the white? There you go. And all I do, I push hard and cut back and down. So that's all you need to do, just a simple little movement. The body is the larger part, the wings taper. And I'm going to have one there, the other one is slightly to the right, and that's at a different angle. Notice I've done two angles. You can see when we finish the first half, how I've done one way, one the other. You know, or if you've got a group of gulls, they'll all be the same. But these could be birds of prey floating around in the sky. I'll put two in. I'm going to put in another smaller one, just keeping it there. There we go. And that is really, I think, for the start, and a loose, atmospheric, tonal version, but you never get the beauty of it until you create a mantle around it. Right? Now this is the reason that I've put tape around. I've not taped it to the board, I've just taped it so that, and now my mic is all cracking because I'm pulling that around. So once you tape it, now when you peel the tape, I'll peel it away from the picture rather than in the picture because of a tear. And all you need to do, the last thing you need to do, if you've not taped around the outside, don't worry, when you get home, if you've got a mount or 4 pieces of cards, lay them over it because you can balance up the scene. And as I say, to all of my people in groups, always sign your artwork. Because one day, in 150 years' time, when they find this up in the loft, if it's anything like mine, it'll be absolutely worthless. But basically, always sign your work. That then denotes that it's you who painted it. And I'm going to sign, do you know I'm going to sign on the right here? And it's my signature with a brush. So put it this way, if I signed that on a cheque, it wouldn't pass the regulation. And so there you have it. Quite a simple but effective way of getting used to tone values within your landscapes. Okay, so that's the first half. This afternoon we will be painting one in colour. Okay, we'll have our lunch.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, I hope you enjoyed watching that tonal study. Next Friday, I'll be showing you how we all painted the coloured version. I hope you can join me.